Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, killers and survivors. We're soon to be in the next chapter of Dead by Daylight, which has been announced to be a collaboration with Capcom for the Resident Evil 25th anniversary. Now, there's been much talk online with regards to who the killer should be if we only get one killer. Most of the talk has been around the two main thick boys, so Nemesis versus Mr. X, Mr. X versus Nemesis.
Jesus Christ!
Damn, boy, he's thick, boy! Damn, boy, he's thick, boy!
In this video, I'm going to discuss why I do fundamentally believe if we only get one killer from Resident Evil, that killer, that thick boy, should be the ultimate chase machine, the ultimate tyrant, and the best thick boy in all of Resident Evil, that being the Nemesis. Let's do this. Now, as stated by Behaviour Interactive and their overall mindset in terms of licensed and franchise killers coming into DBD, something that they're really keen to bring into the game is historical iconography, so an icon of their industry, an icon of their IP, of their franchise. And in Resident Evil, in terms of enemy types, there's nobody with more historical context over the past 25 years of Resident Evil than, of course, the Nemesis, the Pursuer. He was the icon of Resident Evil pretty much from his release on the initial PlayStation 1 release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, all the way up until 2019. At the very latest, which was the release of Resident Evil 2 Remake. Of course, Mr. X becoming more popular due to, firstly, the memes, and secondly, new players who had never really been pursued in a game before. But Nemesis pretty much laid the groundwork of that whole pursuer type creature who would follow you throughout the game, or at least sections of the game, could pretty much one-shot you, or at the very least two-shot you. Nemesis pretty much did that first in Resident Evil, at least. Nemesis is an icon, nobody can even argue that. Nobody can honestly say that Mr. X is a bigger icon to the franchise of Resident Evil over the past 25 years compared to the Nemesis. Absolutely nobody. Nemesis has appeared in multiple games within the Resident Evil franchise, as well as certain crossovers. Crossovers including Marvel vs. Capcom, where he's a mainstay. He's not necessarily a competitive fighter, he's not necessarily a top tier fighter, but he has been in Marvel vs. Capcom for a number of years now, a number of generations. He's also appeared in one of those absolutely terrible Paul W.S. Anderson movies, the Hollywood movies. He was in a Resident Evil Apocalypse. Don't get me started on the outfit and the actual costume, because it's absolutely terrible.
He's mutated. I want him in the Nemesis program.
But he still appeared in the movie. He's been in comics, novels, other crossovers. The Nemesis was pretty much the unintended face of Resident Evil in terms of the antagonists at the very least. For roughly 20 years, that's 2 decades, even terrible games like Operation Raccoon City featured Nemesis as a non-canon but key antagonist within the game. Mr. X often just appearing as a side boss or a micro boss that just ended a chapter or just ended a level. The Nemesis is a lot more intimidating, a lot more iconic, a lot more important to the overall franchise of Resident Evil. So I think, hopefully, Behaviour will see that. Of course, even as a Nemesis fanboy, I can't argue the fact that at the moment Mr. X is more popular than the Nemesis. He just is. Partly it is down to the memes, and it's partly due to the stellar remake of Resident Evil 2. Especially in the newer fanbase of Resident Evil fans that didn't necessarily play the OG games, especially with the remake, the poor remake of Resident Evil 3. I say poor, but substandard, average, whatever you want to call it. You've got to consider that Mr. X's iconography, the fact that he's only a short-term icon, he's only really been at the forefront of the Resident Evil franchise for the past 2 going on 3 years, and that's partly due to memes. And I'll compare that to, there's no spoilers here, but I'm pretty sure everybody that's kept track of Resident Evil 8 Village they've pretty much found out that Lady Dimitrescu was in a big part of bait and switch. She only appears in the first half of the game, if that, and I think that shows that the majority of the time, memes, characters that prop themselves up on memes and memes alone, which is pretty much what Mr. X has done. Characters that survive on memes are usually disappointing. They usually don't live up to the hype, they don't live up to the memes, they don't. Once the meme is arrived and once the meme achieves something, the end result isn't usually that spectacular. And I think Lady Dimitrescu disappointing so many people will lend credence to that in terms of Mr. X coming to DBD, of which Mr. X won't offer a lot of gameplay variety. It just shows that meme culture and viral culture, it's very cyclical. Once a meme is dead, it's very, very hard to revive it again. Mr. X has had his intimidating image devalued a little bit because of the fact that he's become a meme, whereas Nemesis has never really became a mainstream meme. Same with Lady Dimitrescu, sure, she's meant to be terrifying, but because she's now mommy milkers and people want her to step on them, her fear factor, her intimidation factor has actually become a thirst factor. And if you want to touch upon it, remember guys, Nemesis has tentacles. I know there's a very big thirsty community in DBD, and why would you want Mr. X when you've got a tentacle monster waiting for you right there? Come on guys, come on. Irrelevant of the fact that I am a Nemesis fanboy, I genuinely don't really care that much. Obviously it's my dream to play as the Nemesis, especially in a game as good as DBD, but I really care more about the gameplay. If it's Wesker and he has good gameplay, I'll be very happy. Sure, I'll be upset it's not Nemesis, but I just want good gameplay. And despite the fact that Mr. X is more popular at the moment, you have to boil it down to brass tacks really and say to yourself, what can Mr. X bring to the gameplay? The gameplay that's different and fun and also is balanced and utilises the license of Resident Evil, which is arguably more popular than Silent Hill, who had an absolutely awesome killer in Pyramid Head. What can Mr. X bring to the gameplay? And I'm going to boil it down to you. Mr. X's whole power, outside of his Super Tyrant, which is just a Mori machine straight away, there's no arguing. If he hits you, he kills you straight away. So we can't have Super Tyrant. Mr. X's gameplay is Stalk, Punch, Insta-Down and Mori. That's his whole kit, that's all he does. We already have this in Michael Myers. Mr. X would just be louder. The only power that Mr. X can really have in canon, within his power, that doesn't fundamentally change him, is the power to auto-break pallets and walls. Now what you've got to understand is this is an asymmetrical multiplayer game. There's no story mode, there's not even a mode where you can face bots at the moment either. The auto-breaking of pallets is very, very hard to balance. It's very difficult to balance. It's pretty much outside of flashlights. It's pretty much the only defense survivors have against the killer to slow them down. It's very, very difficult to balance. Never mind the fact that a power like that could make certain perks absolutely broken or totally irrelevant. Just think of perks like Spirit Fury, Unrelenting, Brutal Strength, which is from one of Trapper's perks. It would honestly either break those perks or make them totally irrelevant, and I think every killer should be able to benefit from certain perks. With a power like that, a power that Behaviour have already in the past scrapped a killer with that power due to not being able to balance it correctly, it's too boring for the use of a license like Resident Evil, but it's also almost impossible to balance correctly. And what a lot of people are failing to realise when they say that they want Mr. X in DBD, and the fact that having an auto break of pallet power would be enough to make him stand out from the crowd. You've got to remember, Capcom and Konami have got a long-term professional rivalry. Capcom will have seen Pyramid Head and what Konami allowed Behaviour to do in terms of carte blanche with Pyramid Head's powers and how awesome Pyramid Head turned out to be and how unique he turned out to be in the 4th anniversary of DBD. And Capcom are going to see that and they're going to say, we don't just want a killer who can break pallets. They'll know that that's boring, they'll know that that doesn't sell units. Outside of the initial hype period, Mr. X won't sell very well if you've got someone coming to the game looking at all of the licensed killers and seeing how much Pyramid Head can do, and then comparing it to Mr. X and saying, right, he can break pallets, great. Doesn't really seem very fun, whereas Pyramid Head can torment, he can cages, free Mori, all the other stuff that he does. Sure, his perks are absolutely rubbish, but in terms of his core gameplay, Pyramid Head's really fun. It's really different. He has a lot of gameplay variety. I don't think Capcom will be very happy with a killer that can just break pallets. That's just my personal opinion, but I don't think they would be happy with that. Obviously, the big point when it comes to bringing Nemesis in particular to DBD is the point of balance. It's a very big talking point online, and I'll concede, sure, it's a very, very nuanced issue and there's many ways you can tackle it. Because he has power diversity, because he demonstrates so many powers and abilities within his own canon within Resident Evil, there are enough powers there to, one, not necessarily fundamentally change him as a character or having to add powers like they did with Pyramid Head, but there's also enough powers there to not feel like you're missing something if you don't feature them all. And it's fair to raise that argument, because bringing Nemesis into DBD without careful consideration would be like bringing Goku or Superman into DBD. You'd just think, well, what can you do to make them fun whilst also not being overpowered? And I come up with a number of points really. Firstly, if you really don't want to feature the rocket launcher, which in canon Nemesis barely uses anyway, it's just iconic with it, you could use the flamethrower from Remake instead, and obviously that would be an area of effect, damage over time sort of weapon, as long as it had a reasonable cooldown and obviously an overheat meter as well, since it is a flamethrower. Be similar to Trickster's Laceration, obviously, where you'd have a burning meter, but it would be interesting because it would be able to shut down certain loops. So you could use a flamethrower on a window, for instance, so if a survivor is nearly burnt to death, then of course you take the window out of the loop totally, or you could burn pallets as well, which would prevent them from sliding over pallets, or after a certain amount of time that pallet would break without having to do the break animation. Obviously it would take roughly 10 to 20 seconds, so it's not overpowered, but that could be something Nemesis could do. Obviously he's got his tentacles as well, so you don't really want to tread on Deathslinger's toes where you latch onto them and then you reel them in. Instead, you could use it as a T-Virus administrator, so it would administer T-Virus similar to Plague Power, but the tentacle itself, it wouldn't reel the survivor in. Instead, it would literally just prevent them from doing something. It would stop them for 5 seconds where T-Virus builds up. Obviously, after they break free, you would have a cooldown animation similar to when you look at your weapon when you M1 somebody. But that T-Virus, it would stop them from doing what they're going to do. That tentacle would stop them from doing what they want to do. And in the struggle, they may forget, they may lose track of thought for 5 to 10 seconds of thinking, oh, what I've got to do, I've got to go to that generator, and the whole game could change, literally. You know, with the T-Virus as well, you wouldn't want to make it the same as Plagues, but if you look at the T-Virus in canon, in the lore of Resident Evil, whether that be movies, games, novels, comics, manhwas, whatever it is, the T-Virus doesn't automatically transform somebody into a zombie. They go through a certain period of time where, unless they know they've been bitten or they hide the fact that they've been bitten, people don't tend to realise they've got the T-Virus until they're about to turn. And you could make the T-Virus really, really interesting. Even the survivor that's got the T-Virus isn't aware that they've got it until they've reached a period of 60 to 70% infection rate. But when they operate a generator, similar to what they do in canon, where when they begin turning, they start doing things that would harm themselves, harm their team, harm the people that they're with, in terms of, I don't know, they usually turn a gun on them, or they usually lock a door or something like that. You could actually, whenever a survivor is fixing a generator, you could in fact make it so they regress the generator instead, so every time they complete a skill check, the generator goes down without the sparks. Or if 2 people are on the generator, balances it out, or if more people are fixing the generator than people that are damaging it, it makes it slow down. But they would only be alert once they reach the 60-70%, as they would in game when they start getting the veins, when they start acting erratic. And I think that'd be a really, really cool way of using the T-Virus without necessarily having them turn into zombies, because that would be very difficult to balance too. Obviously they can cleanse themselves with the antidote, for instance, but once they reach 100% twice, then they'll die, or once they reach it 3 times, they'll die. Obviously that's a very long game then, so people want to get on and go to the next game. The big one though is the rocket launcher. People think that Nemesis uses the rocket launcher all the time. I've seen it so many times online. You can't put a killer in the game that's got a rocket launcher, that would just break the game, that would just break the game, man. You can't have a rocket launcher. One, let's get the record straight. Nemesis barely uses the rocket launcher. I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter what pictures you've seen, what Tumblr art or Deviant art you've seen of Nemesis, what you've heard of Nemesis, what you've played of Nemesis, I don't care. The game where he uses the rocket launcher the most is in Marvel vs. Capcom. That's his whole thing in Marvel vs. Capcom. Nemesis is iconic with the rocket launcher because you're thinking to yourself, oh shit, there's a Tyrant using a rocket launcher. It's not because he uses the rocket launcher all the time. Nemesis uses the rocket launcher twice, I think, in OG RE3, and he uses it once in the remake, and that's in a very, very scripted sequence. It looks absolutely awesome when he takes the rocket launcher out of the box and he drops it on the floor. He barely uses it. trust me, he barely uses the rocket launcher. It's basically a power up that he gets that he uses temporarily. However, you could balance the rocket launcher very easily. Work with me here. You could make Nemesis's rocket launcher very similar to a Call of Duty care package, and as a token based prerequisite in order for the rocket launcher to spawn. So it's not even like NOED where you can have a totally bad game and still down people, because you would have to balance it in a certain way where in order to get the rocket launcher you would need anywhere from 7 to let's say 9 or 10 hooks for the rocket launcher to spawn, or something like 16 M1 hits, which realistically should be, if you're playing optimally, should be 8 hooks, because it's 2 M1 hits per person. To unlock the rocket launcher you do have to work for it, you can't just cheese it pretty much, you cannot cheese it. And in order to balance it, if you're the Nemesis and you're chasing someone on a part of a map, bear in mind this is going to be mid to late game. The box, similar to what's in the remake of 3, rocket launcher box only spawns in the absolute deadest part of the map. So, where there are no generators, where survivors are not going to be unless they're hiding or being immersive or whatnot, meaning you either have to give up chase, you have to give up defended generators, you have to give up exactly what you're doing if you really want that rocket launcher. You have to then traverse to the opposite side of the map, which could take anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes, depending on how well you're playing and what's in your way. Then you have to unbox the rocket launcher, which then takes another 5 to 10 seconds. You then have to traverse back to where the survivors are. Think of the amount of time that you would have to spend in order to do all of that. Survivors could have finished two or more generators by then. 1 to 2 generators, they could even have finished them all in that time. And it also lowers your movement speed to 105 or 110 whilst carrying the rocket launcher. That is very balanced. And think about it, if the rocket launcher only has one shot, of which, bear in mind, it goes in a straight line, it doesn't arc, it doesn't turn, it doesn't loop, it goes in a straight line. It's a rocket launcher. It's not a gimmicky thing, it's not a hatchet which will drop in midair. It will shoot perfectly straight and it will explode. So if the survivors run out of line of sight and you don't get it in the perfect spot, so behind them, you're never going to hit it. Remember, it can have, let's just say, depending on add-ons, it can have it's a one-shot standard or up to 3 shots with the rocket launcher, depending on lethality add-ons. So for instance, you have the best add-on that reduces lethality the most. It won't auto kill or insta down people, and it has a much reduced AoE, whereas with one shot you can insta down and it's got quite a big AoE. And I think that in terms of that, it's, if you have one shot, how can you call that unbalanced? I think that the thing with Nemesis that I think you could really do is you can lean into the lore of Nemesis being a squad killer, being a team killer. The game is very difficult when you play against a optimized survive with friends group, and I think the Nemesis could be utilized as a way to play more comfortably against optimal survive with friends groups. It will prevent them from being as altruistic. You can always tell when people are survive with friends because they'll always try and make saves, they'll always try and heal, they'll always try and body block, they'll usually try and gem rush as well, especially when you're in a 3-gen situation. They'll try and gem rush. If you've got the rocket launcher, they're not going to do that. If they know that you've gone and picked up that rocket launcher and you're ready with that shot, they're not going to gem rush. They're not going to 4-man a generator out, all run improve thyself and brand new part. They're not going to do it, because the moment you rocket launch them and you down all 4 of them in one hit, it's game over for them unless they've got unbreakable. It's absolutely game over for them. That's 4 hooks, game over. Unless they've got unbreakable or they've got deliverance, it's game over for them. So it will get survive with friends to split up. The rocket launcher has potential to change the game. It also has the potential to be very balanced if you think about it. You've just got to think about ways in order to unlock it. You just don't have it as standard. You have to earn the rocket launcher. The only way you get the rocket launcher is if you play well, and with 8 hooks you've played pretty well. You've hooked everybody twice already. When you do the math, if you don't focus on one person or there's a really bad player you keep running into, you have to earn the rocket launcher. And I think that's a very simple way, but a very nuanced way of balancing the Nemesis perfectly for DBD. Finally, lore importance to the franchise of Resident Evil. I'm not going to waffle here because there's no subjectivity involved in this. It's all objective, it's all lore based. We've already spoke about the iconography and the importance of the franchise, but lore relevance is also important too, especially to behaviour. The Nemesis' main function in the Resident Evil canon in both the original and remake of 3 is to sweep into Raccoon City and eliminate every single member of STARS, which is the most elite squad in Raccoon City's police department, and then to be deployed elsewhere for any other STARS survivors who weren't in Raccoon City at the time he was deployed. such as Chris. Chris is canonically not in Raccoon City. He's in Europe during the events of Resident Evil 3. On the other hand, Mr. X is the cleaning crew. Basically, I think there were 6 members of the Mr. X model Tyrant, and they were sent as a cleaning crew to Raccoon City in order to kill and eliminate any remaining survivors in Raccoon City that could be used as witnesses against Umbrella. And the one that Leon and Claire fight in the police station was sent to retrieve Chevy Birkin's locket, which had a G-Virus sample within it. You know, their missions are pretty much night and day. Mr. X is a lot more mundane in terms of what he's gonna do than Nemesis. Nemesis is a lot more specialized. Nemesis is a lot more, is a lot cooler. He's a squad killer. That's what he's sent for. Don't get me wrong, he will kill anybody that he sees as working with stars or somebody that's in his way. But you know, the Nemesis is basically Mr. X but better. He's more fine-tuned, he's remixed, he's everything that Mr. X can do, the Nemesis can do. But if that doesn't clinch it in terms of the importance of Nemesis over Mr. X to the lore, remember this: in the original canon of Resident Evil 3, when Nemesis is badly injured in the Dead Factory against Jill, Nemesis literally eats a Mr. X model Tyrant in order to survive, and then he transforms, he mutates. But this guy literally eats a Mr. X. So effectively, he eats Mr. X for breakfast, figuratively and literally. Also, you gotta remember, Nemesis had an entire game named after him. Sure, it was initially a spin-off. It wasn't meant to be the RE3. It wasn't meant to be the real RE3. Code Veronica was meant to be the RE3, but they made it into a mainline entry game. The name was named after him. Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Never forget that. So if that doesn't clinch it, I don't know what will. I mean, he's got tentacles, I've said that before. Just think of the fan art you could do with tentacles, guys. So those are my thoughts and my reasons as to why I believe the Nemesis should be the Resident Evil collaboration killer in Dead by Daylight. What are your thoughts? Do you think I raised my points well? If you did agree, leave me a comment. If you disagreed, also leave me a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe the video too. It's very difficult to reach a wider audience, especially as a small content creator. It's very difficult, so everything that you can do, sharing, commenting, liking the video, subscribing to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. It really does help the algorithm. I do intend to do different content, more creative content, you know, content that people may not have addressed before, you know, so I'm going to hope to make things a little bit different in terms of gaming and other things in life. So yeah, please do interact with myself, as it will help on the algorithm. More Dead by Daylight content to come and other generic gaming content too. Until the next time, Heath Legend is out of here. Take care, guys.